It's a bumper week for corporate earnings, with major European companies set to reveal how they're coping with supply chain issues, as well as soaring inflation. Here in London, the FTSE 100 gained 0.33%. Banks and miners driving most of the gains. But investors are also keeping a close eye on the US Federal Reserve and what happens on the other side of the Atlantic. The central bank is expected to raise interest rates on Wednesday to try and combat rising prices. Over in Germany, the flagship index, the DAX, posted a smaller gain. Business confidence in Europe's largest economy has fallen to its lowest level for more than 2 years. Investors worry the Russian gas crisis could tip Germany into recession. In Paris, the CAC ended the day more or less unchanged. Again, energy and inflation weighing on stock markets all across the globe. Let's try and make sense of it and talk about the biggest talking points from earnings season so far. Victoria Scholar is Head of Investment at Interactive Investor and joins us now. Victoria, thanks for being here. Ryanair has made its first spring profits since the coronavirus pandemic hit. How is the airline navigating the challenging backdrop of volatile fuel prices as well as the travel chaos we're seeing?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no doubt that Ryanair is having a tough time at the moment, like many airlines and indeed the broader travel industry. But despite this, like you say, it managed to achieve a strong earnings quarter, logging a profit of 170 million euros. That was ahead of expectations, but it was about 2/3 of the profit that it made in the same period of 2019, before the onset of the pandemic, of course. But Ryanair is saying that the recovery is still very fragile, and that means that it's unable to provide any guidance looking ahead. But like you say, there's a whole host of challenges that the whole sector is dealing with following the war in Ukraine. You know, we've seen the consequent soaring prices. There's also staff shortages and the spread of COVID. And that's why we've seen so many unhappy passengers on the front of newspapers in recent months, with the sector hit by strikes, cancellations and delays. And Ryanair's share price is down by about 30% this year since the February peak.
Yeah, and another major company in Europe where there are changes up at the top is Volkswagen. Porsche's CEO now takes over the top job. What can we expect from the new CEO, do you think, and what sort of legacy will outgoing Herbert Diess leave?
Well, it feels as though there were already concerns about the incoming CEO, Oliver Blume, and whether or not he's actually got the capacity to take on this huge job, because he's already the chief executive of Porsche, a role that he's not planning to give up. So investors are a bit worried that he might be taking on a bit more than he can handle, especially given that Porsche is set for an IPO in the fourth quarter. So there are worries that he's spreading himself a bit too thinly. But some investors are thinking that long-term, this isn't going to work. And then to your second question about the legacy of Herbert Diess, you know, he took on Volkswagen and took to the top job at a really challenging time. It was in the aftermath of the emissions scandal. Really helped to drive VW towards electric vehicles. But ultimately, he ended up clashing with unions, suggesting that the group had too much staff. And also, he got in a bit of controversy given that he kept comparing VW to its rival Tesla.
And one major company reporting this week, French conglomerate, luxury retail conglomerate LVMH. What can we expect there, do you think, particularly given the issues we've been talking about, inflation and the cost of living crisis around the world?
Certainly, it feels as though a lot of companies are going to be affected by inflation, like you say, and the cost of living crisis. But compared to its rivals, LVMH is expected to perform a little bit better. We're expecting second quarter sales of around 17 billion euros and operating profits of nearly 10 billion euros. On the one hand, you know, there is likely to be a strong year-on-year comparison given where we were in terms of the pandemic this time last year, but we are looking at quarter-on-quarter slowdowns. Clearly, luxury is affected by China, one of its key markets. That's been facing COVID lockdown, so that could potentially weigh on results. But we are looking for the conglomerate that's the owner of Louis Vuitton and Dior to outpace some of its rivals.
The key one to watch this week. Thank you for joining us. That's Victoria Scholar, Head of Investment at Interactive Investor.